My name's Sue Bolcombe. I'm the Director of Nursing and Patient Safety for Somerset Partnership Trust, and I'm the Director Lead for Safeguarding. The film is really about making sure that staff feel comfortable and understand the relationship between safeguarding and the Mental Capacity Act. We recognise it can be really confusing for some of our staff, and the purpose of this video is really to explain it simply so that they feel they understand what it is and where to go and what support is available to them.
I'd describe the Mental Capacity Act as a really good piece of legislation. What it does is put people back in control of the care they want to receive. So the Capacity Act is a really good framework for helping people and the agents of the state understand what they can and can't do. If a doctor sees someone, for example, and diagnoses some kind of illness or condition and then suggests some sort of treatment for it, you know, from a rushed doctor's perspective, it makes perfect sense. You know, this is your illness, this is the treatment, off you go and get it. Someone might be scared by that. They might not understand what's being said. They might completely understand it and just not want it. They might prefer to live with the symptoms that they've got and not have the treatment that's being offered because there might be some side effects that they don't like. Or they might just think, it's my life, I just want to live it naturally without any intervention. And if they've got the ability to make that decision for themselves, if they fully understand what they're being told, then they have the perfect right to say no thanks. I'll go away and let nature take its course. And that can be difficult for professionals who can see people making decisions that they know are going to lead to them perhaps needlessly suffering. But that's the right we all have as humans to make. Mental illness doesn't equate to a lack of mental capacity, and people with a diagnosis of a mental illness don't automatically lose capacity to make decisions for themselves. I'm hoping that people stop being scared by the fact that this is a piece of law and it's something you must comply with, and I hope people can understand that it's a very sensible piece of law, and in fact, if you apply common sense, you'll probably find you're following the law. The Capacity Act potentially applies to all of us. We should all have a basic awareness of it. It's the kind of decisions that might be being made that might be different for different people. So a doctor might be wrestling with a really difficult decision to be made about two types of quite specialist treatment for someone, for example, whilst a healthcare assistant might be deciding what kind of shoes somebody should be putting on in the morning. The framework you make the decision in is exactly the same. You know, does the person have the capacity to make the decision themselves? If not, what's in their best interests?
I used to be in the Ministry of Defence. I used to bring in all the aircraft and all sorts. Oh yes, I've travelled a lot, yeah. Yeah, I had a timeshare in Tenerife at one time. As far as I'm concerned, I've always made decisions for myself, whether people like it or not. I must have fallen on the floor and blacked out. And then I was taken to one hospital, and then I went from there to another one, and it went on and on. I didn't know where I was half the time. I really didn't know where I was half the time. Can you imagine that? Being in a hospital, and yeah, they even checked the foods I was eating. And I used to say to them, I don't like that stuff. Why do what it is prescribed for you? But I mean, it was awful, really. They seem to do what they like with you in hospitals. You want to know what's happening to you. I didn't know what was happening to me for a start. Do you understand? They take me from one place to another to another. If I, at night time, if I couldn't do anything about it, I used to wet myself in the bed. They used to come and change it. No, not very nice, is it? I didn't know what was going on. No. Well, I don't think I'm doolally. They might think I'm doolally and they might go and get stuffed as far as I'm concerned. I feel like that about it because of the doctors. They don't really bother. They don't bother about you at all. You're just a bloody nuisance. You're just it just suits them. All of it suits them. You think you're going to get some help and you don't really get any help at all. Not in the end. As far as I'm concerned, you should be able to make your own decisions whatever happens. Most people don't get the chance.
The basic principles underlying the whole Capacity Act are in the Capacity Act itself, and there are 5 basic principles. The first principle is that a person must be presumed to have capacity until it's established that they lack capacity. Now that's a really important principle. It means every time you as a healthcare professional go and see someone, or if they come to you for a first assessment, your starting point is that that person has capacity. The onus is on you to show that they lack capacity for something if you think they do. Otherwise, you have to presume they have capacity. The second principle is that a person cannot be treated as unable to make a decision unless all practicable steps have been taken to help them make that decision for themselves. This one means you can't make decisions quickly if you've got time to allow someone to make a decision for themselves. Or if someone has difficulty communicating, you have to go to the extra lengths to make sure you can communicate with someone. So, for example, if you're trying to assess someone's capacity and that person is deaf and communicates by sign language, then the onus is on you to find a sign language interpreter to help you communicate with the person. You can't assume the person lacks capacity just because you can't understand their means of communication. The third principle is my personal favourite one. It's that a person can't be treated as incapable to make a decision just because they make an unwise decision. So somebody with capacity is allowed to disagree with their doctors or their healthcare staff. And if they've got the capacity to disagree, that's fine. It doesn't mean they lack capacity just because they do something that the professionals might think is unwise or a bit silly. We're all humans, we're all allowed to make choices if we've got the capacity to do so. The fourth principle is that any decision that's being made or anything that's done on behalf of someone that lacks capacity must be done in their best interests. And that's where the best interests checklist comes in. The fifth principle is the principle of less restriction. So if it's possible to achieve the desired outcome using something less restrictive than was first thought of, then you should go with the less restrictive alternative. There's something called the two-stage test for working out whether or not someone has the capacity to make a decision. The first part of the test is to work out whether the person has an impairment of or a disturbance in the functioning of the mind or brain. If perhaps somebody's suffering from a mental illness, that could have an impairment in the functioning of their mind or brain. Perhaps somebody's got dementia, perhaps somebody's got a brain injury that's affecting the way their brain works. All of those things fall into this category. The important thing to remember is there will be times when some people seem unable to make a decision, but it's not because of an impairment of or a disturbance in the functioning of their mind or brain. For example, somebody might be being bullied or being overfaced by someone else. They might be under what's known as undue pressure from someone else. Even though they're not able to make a decision, they don't lack capacity as defined in the Mental Capacity Act. So if we want to make a decision and help them be able to make a decision for themselves, we have to find some other way of doing that other than the Capacity Act. The second part of the test is, does that impairment or disturbance mean the person can't make the decision? So the person has to be suffering from an impairment or disturbance in their mind or brain, and it's that means they can't make a decision. You have to then decide, can this person make a decision for themselves or not? Is the impairment in their mind or brain disabling them from being able to make a decision? So how do you work that out? Well, there's a series of questions you have to ask. So the first question is, can the person understand the information they've been given in order to make a decision? The second question you have to ask is, Can the person retain the information long enough to be able to make a decision? The third question is, can the person use or weigh that information in order to make the decision? And then the fourth point that you have to think about is, can the person communicate their decision? If the person's unable to do any of those things, then they lack capacity. They can't make the decision, and a decision has to be made in their best interests. If people follow a few basic rules, they should never end up in court. The problems which have arisen around the country tend to be situations where social workers or doctors or nurses have decided that a particular person who may be vulnerable due to perhaps having a learning disability should be placed in some kind of supported accommodation or in some kind of residential care setting. And from their perspective, they think it's completely obvious that this person needs to go into that setting. And they've done all their assessments and they've worked out that that setting could meet that person's needs and they'd be much better off than where they are. But then the family disagree. So family members will say, hang on a minute, we're actually perfectly happy with where our son or daughter or loved one is at the moment, and we think they're fine, we think we can carry on caring for them fine. And the professionals kind of bulldoze these family members out of the way and say, well, no, we're the experts, we know best, and this person has to go here and we can look after them much better than you can. People think they're doing the right thing, but they just don't stop to think about what right they have to be doing what they think is right. Because the moment you get an objection from either the person concerned or from a family, you have to stop and think, well, what right do I have to override this family's opinions? What right does the state have to step into this family's life and do something really quite serious to a family member? What right do we have as the state to do that? And unless you know the answer to that, you should stop and seek advice. The moment you're telling family members that you know best, that's when you have to stop and think, well, do we really? And if we do, what right do we have to make us know that we're right? What law is there to back us up to say, yes, you have the legal right to do this? Quite often the mistake that's made around the country is people think that this term safeguarding gives them some sort of power to intervene. They see what from their perspective is a vulnerable person who needs to be protected, and they think, oh, we'll start safeguarding procedures and we'll use the safeguarding process and we'll move them into this care home under safeguarding. Now, unfortunately, safeguarding isn't really a coherent legal concept that has any powers associated with it. There's no Safeguarding Act, for example. So if safeguarding processes show some concerns and show that perhaps somebody might be being abused and should be moved, then the safeguarding process has highlighted that, but then you need some kind of law that allows you to intervene and actually do something about it. And sometimes the Mental Capacity Act is the piece of law that does allow you to do that.
An adult at risk is a person over the age of 18 who needs community care services because of their age, illness, mental health issues or other disability, and who is or may be unable to take care of themselves when they're faced with significant harm or exploitation. And the term adult at risk replaces what we used to term as vulnerable adults. Safeguarding an adult at risk has two primary aims: to prevent harm and reduce risk of abuse or neglect, and also to safeguard individuals in a way that supports them in making choices and having control in how they choose to live. The safeguarding team work closely with experts from other fields. For example, our own Mental Health Act lead and the local authority's Deprivation of Liberty Standards and Mental Capacity lead. Together, we aim to provide you with the support and advice you need to support those in your care. We all want to do our best to help those in our care. It's important to take the time to consider all of the options available to best support them today, tomorrow, and in the future. The crossover between the different influences and statutory duties that we have is often complex, which is why we encourage you, if you don't know, please ask us. We all want to do our best to help those in our care, and it's important to take the time to consider all of the options available to best support them today, tomorrow, and in the future. It may be that you think, that following the safeguarding process is something that, is an extra piece of work, but actually investing in that today will not only impact on the person's life in a more positive way, but actually could change the course of things and protect them for the future. And that crossover between the different influences and statutory duties that we have is often complex. And it's why I encourage you, if you're in doubt, please ask us. What's really important to remember is doing nothing is not an option.